Music is a lot like clothes. If you keep something in the back of the closet long enough, it'll eventually come back into style. Well, almost everything. Corduroy leisure suits were a bad idea in the 70s, and they'll be a bad idea forever. Do you hear me, Dad? Yeah, just put it away. Anyway, let's get back to music. Certain styles of music go in and out of favor. I mean, look at disco. In the 70s, when Dad bought that leisure suit, it was reviled and hated. Now, though, most people look at it as a form of fun, goofy retro. Now, be honest. You've done the YMCA dance, and probably not just at your cousin's wedding either. You've done it. Sure you have. Bands also fall in and out of favor. The Ramones were cool, then they were a joke for many years, and then suddenly they were revered as gods. Duran Duran, same thing. Gods, goofs, gods again. And then there's a band like The Cure. They were really, really hot, then kind of cool, then really hot again, and then they just kind of faded away. And then they came back, mostly on the strength of their long-term fan base, but also thanks to a new, younger generation, because they heard their heroes, groups like Korn and the dudes who created South Park, raving about how cool and influential The Cure was to them and how important they were as a band to their generation. Now, this may create some confusion and bewilderment. A number of today's music fans might very well want to ask, The Cure? What's the big deal about them?
Now, the ongoing history of new music.
Just pull on your
The Cure, live at the Molson Amphitheatre in Toronto on August 9th, 2004. There were about 15,000 people in the audience that night, and tens of thousands more listening to a rare live radio broadcast of the show, both in Southern Ontario and around the world on the Internet. Now, trust me, The Cure has a lot of fans on this planet. Hello again, I'm Alan Cross, and this is another in an occasional series that explores the big deal about some of the founding fathers and mothers of the thing that we now call new rock. Older fans know all about groups like the Velvet Underground and the Smiths and singers like Morrissey and Patti Smith and Iggy Pop. But if you're under a certain age, these names come from a different era and thus may have about as much emotional relevance as, say, Mozart or Beethoven or Elvis or something. But you know what they say, respect your elders. And this is another case where we're going to lay some respect on some old-school alternative rockers. The Cure, believe it or not, has been around as long as U2. Longer, actually, if only by a few months. The first known instance of Robert Smith playing in a band that would eventually evolve into The Cure is January 23rd, 1976. U2 didn't even get going until that fall. Unlike U2, however, The Cure's lineup was, for the most part, kind of fluid. The only real constant has been the group's singer, chief songwriter and occasional dictator and despot, Robert Smith. Under his leadership, the band has sold more than 30 million records, millions of concert tickets, and untold tons of hair products.
At varying stages in what we've done, I felt that was it. I certainly felt in 1982, after we did Pornography, that was 4 albums in, I kind of felt that was it, and I played with the Banshees for a while, and I sort of felt The Cure was probably the first stage of what I was going to do with my life. At that point, I would have laughed maniacally if you'd suggested I'd be still doing it 20 years on. After Disintegration, which is another high point for me, I felt that was probably a natural place to stop. I genuinely felt for about 6 months that was it. I felt we were playing stadiums in North America and I didn't think there was anywhere else to go. And any level, I thought I'd reached a creative peak and the only way was down. And I similarly felt, as I've explained earlier, the same way after Blood Flowers, for a number of different reasons. I felt I promised myself when I got to 40 that I would change tack, I would do something else. I had to do something different at 40 or I would never do anything different. It was a great plan, but what I hadn't considered was how I would actually feel when I got to 40, and I didn't feel 40, so it didn't really make much sense to me to stop. And now I was 45 last month, and I still feel worryingly the same as I did when I first started. There is something very wrong with me, I think.
So what is the big deal about The Cure? Well, let's start with the band's importance when it comes to a flavor of post-punk rock called goth. Now, goth, which is short for gothic rock, began as the original punk rock explosion of the 1970s began to die out. As punk lost steam, some of the more dour and fashion-conscious English adherents were looking for a new scene to make their own, and they found it in the form of a Halloween party that never really wanted to end. Several groups started experimenting with a more somber and theatrical approach to new music. They took cues from David Bowie's more grim tunes. They incorporated dark flashes of glam rock with makeup and black clothing. And most importantly, they literally got gothic. Now here's the dictionary definition. Gothic, noting or pertaining to a style of literature or music characterized by a gloomy setting, grotesque or macabre events, supernatural or psychological plot elements, and an atmosphere of terror, degeneration, and decay. The settings and themes of a lot of goth songs and performances were reminiscent of English Gothic novels of the 19th century, books like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and Jane Eyre from Charlotte Bronte, and of course Bram Stoker's Dracula. The style and dress and overall attitude of the musicians also fit in with the mood of this particular era in literature. In fact, this music was originally called English Gothic Punk, but that was soon shortened to just goth. Goth images were also borrowed from horror movies, ranging from old black and white films of the 40s and 50s to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And for a number of years, goth was a big, big deal. It spawned groups like the Sisters of Mercy and The Mission and Alien Sex Fiend and Christian Death and The Birthday Party and Sex Gang Children and dozens of others. The scene is mostly underground these days, but its influences, especially in terms of fashion, can still be found just about everywhere. But we'll get back to that in just a bit. The Cure may argue that they don't belong in this category. Pure goths will probably agree with them. But because The Cure's early successes came during this period, and because their look and sound fit in with goth culture, superficially anyway, the association between The Cure and goth was made long, long ago, and it's pretty hard to erase. And whether they liked it or not, The Cure became the biggest goth, or at least goth-like band, in the world. The Cure with A Forest from 1980, which was released not too long after a show on February 28, 1979, when a girl pulled her boyfriend's ear off during the Cure set. Stuff like that helped contribute to the macabre goth thing. So, for better or for worse, or rightly or wrongly, the Cure became a big part of the whole goth thing in terms of sound, attitude, and fashion. Let's talk about all that right after this.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
The central question of this show is, what's the big deal about The Cure? And we've already talked about how the group was instrumental in the rise of goth culture, which is a culture that continues even today all over the world. Part of the appeal of The Cure and goth was its nihilism. It was music to be miserable to, the soundtrack to depression and resignation and all manner of dark thoughts. Goth music is one of the genres in which you can take solace and sanctuary. It can be intensely personal and emotional, just the kind of thing that you may be looking for if you're in a bleak mood or have a grim outlook on the universe. The Cure was very good at writing songs that met this criteria and this need. In fact, their sound earned them the title of the Messiahs of Melancholy, a title that Robert Smith really isn't too crazy about.
You could see it in their faces. They genuinely think that I'm kind of like superhuman or something. That I'm really going to like touch them and they're going to know something. And it's weird because I used to play up to that. It was a road to madness. And it's difficult because I find I really disappoint people because I'm just normal, and they do. They want me to live by candlelight and read Baudelaire and kind of, walk about constantly with like 6 inches of mist around my feet. It doesn't work like that. When Mary and I got married, we bought a house, and when people started turning up there, that's when I decided that enough was enough because it's too weird, you know. Because we live right by the sea, and there's people that camp on the beach and play Cure songs all night, and it's very flattering. And one part of me thinks that's really nice, but another part of me thinks it isn't. It's really awful that they don't have the sensibility to know that, you know, it's just like a really crap thing to do, and yet they get dead upset, and I shout at them. But it's there is I think some of our fans are very, very persistent and very obsessed, I suppose, with the band, and they feel like it's their band as much as it is mine, and they're wrong. if I like something, if it, like musically, sort of keeping it restricted to that, I like it because it does something to me. And if other people like it, it doesn't really bother me at all. I don't think, well, if they get it, then I must move on. That kind of elitism really, really upsets me as well. Something else that really riles me. People who think that the majority of other people are stupid, because they're not, really. I mean, the mainstream taste generally veers wildly away from what I like, but sometimes I kind of like, I like what's mainstream, what's popular. It doesn't stop me liking it. It's like Smashing Pumpkins, something that they get really famous and successful. I still think they're really, really good. It's like with Radiohead, I still think they're really, really good. I'm not going to go off them just because like other people suddenly they've got it. You know, it's like, I think it's the same with us, that somehow that people suspect it invalidates what you do just because that more and more people start to enjoy it. But I like the idea of lots of people listening to us. I don't know. No, I don't believe in God really. I have in my worst moments, I have belief in absolutely nothing. I think everything's just as it seems. I don't. Quite often, most of the time, I have no belief in my own existence after I die. No, I don't at all. Which is where all the depression comes from in a lot of the songs. I mean, it's such a. Everything's so hollow if you actually feel like that, and you can't ever shake it. And I don't know. I find it through a very cynical phase. There's still vestiges of it, which only leads me to believe that people have faith because they're scared and that they won't accept their own finite nature.
His arms are around me and he's turning my eyes. Still can't be quiet now, my precious boy. Don't struggle like that, I will only love you. But it's much too late to get away. Turn on the light. The Spider-Man is having you for dinner tonight. And I feel like I'm being eaten by 1,000 shivering furry holes. I know that in the morning I will wake up in the shivering cold. And the Spider-Man is always
The Cure, with one of their songs for the doomed, Lullaby, from 1989's Disintegration album, which is one of their best and one of their gloomiest. Back with more on the big deal behind The Cure, including their influence on fashion and the sound of many of today's bands. Hang tough.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
This is another show in an occasional series that tries to answer what's the big deal about some of the biggest groups in the history of alternative rock. And today we're looking at The Cure. We've already talked about the band's impact on goth rock and how their music offered emotional sanctuary to millions. Now let's talk quickly about fashion, which relates back to the whole goth thing. Robert Smith became something of a gothic-like fashion icon. The white skin, the eye makeup, the lipstick, and of course, the hair. His hairstyles and his use of makeup have been copied by people all over the planet for the last 2.5 decades.
The hair. How long does it take to get that way? When you get out of bed in the morning, how long does it take to get it right?
Honestly, I just get out of bed and it's like this.
Honestly?
Yeah, seriously. The only time it isn't like this is when it rains. Then I have to wear a hat.
What happens? You get all curly and frizzy?
I don't really comb my hair out for like a couple of months at a time, so I don't really have to do very much to it. It's kind of got like a sort of a haystacky kind of vibe to it.
Because there are people that spend thousands of dollars trying to get exactly what you have.
Yeah, but the secret is never comb it out. Just get used to sleeping on lumps.
But you cut it back in the 80s.
Yeah, I've done it 3 times actually. I've shaved my head in the last 20 years. Yeah, I really feel like doing it this summer actually, but I'm married to someone who has threatened that they'll leave me if I shave my head, so it's kind of like not really an option.
Makeup brand. If we're going to do something with industrial applications,
yeah,
what should they do?
Well, MAC Cosmetics have come up with a range of... I was moaning about the fact that my makeup was running when we last played in the desert, and they've given me this makeup that they say, well, if I ever play on the surface of the sun, at least my makeup will remain intact, even though the rest of me may burn. The only thing they're missing is a good black eyeshadow, which I have to tell them the next time I'm over there in one of my high-powered makeup meetings that I have with them nearly. It looks good. It's fun. Severin used to call me Mac when we did the Glove album, so there is a kind of a nice symmetry for me in actually ending up using makeup that seems to have my name on the front of it.
more big deal about The Cure before we finish up, and that's the band's influence on many of today's new rock groups. Like I said back at the beginning, if you stick around long enough, you may just end up having an effect on an entire generation of fans and musicians, such is the case with The Cure. Robert Smith didn't realize what kind of effect The Cure's music had on today's scene until the band started to work on their 2004 self-titled album. It was new metal producer Ross Robinson that brought all this to his attention.
What I didn't understand was that the year before, he lives in California, and he'd been hearing things coming up, new bands saying The Cure, The Cure, The Cure, everything he was listening to, people were name-checking The Cure. And when he'd met us, he was telling me that, and I was kind of thinking, well, he's just a very enthusiastic American, but obviously he's kind of like over-egging the cake a little bit here. But by the time we got to summer 2003, I realised that, in fact, it was becoming very apparent, even in the UK, that there was this upsurge in interest in the group again. We were becoming kind of like a cool band again. So, that added weight to his arguments, which were many and varied. Chief among them was that he was going to kind of kill himself if we didn't make an album, and did I really want that death on my conscience? So in the end I kind of agreed. He said, well, look, you can do a solo album whenever you want, you're not going to ever go away from yourself, do it next year, but do the Cure album now, do it now. And he is the most persistent person I've ever met in my life, and in the end I just felt it would be easier to go along with him. Actually, the moment that I decided that I would do the Cure album, I felt happier, so I kind of knew that was the right thing to do.
If you want to, I never try to stop you. No, there's a reason for all of this. You're feeling low. It's not my call. You couldn't ever love me more. Couldn't love me more. Couldn't love me. I don't show much. It's not that hard to hide, you see. In a moment, I can't remember how to be all you wanted. I couldn't ever love you more. I couldn't love you more. Couldn't love. You want me to cry and play my part. I want you to sigh and fall apart. We want this like everyone else. Stay if you want to. I'd always wait to hear you say there's a last kiss for all the times you run this way. It's not my fault. You couldn't ever love me more. Couldn't love me more. Couldn't
The Cure, cheerful as always with The End of the World from their self-titled 2004 album. Back with a few final words on them in just seconds.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
So, to recap, here is the big deal about The Cure. Number one, their role in the birth and development of goth music. Whether they like it or not, they will go down in history as one of the biggest bands this whole scene has ever produced. Number two, the fashion thing. Robert Smith remains a fashion icon for people around the world with the makeup and the clothes and the hair. Number three, The Cure was one of those rare bands who managed to provide emotional solace to a large chunk of an entire generation of music fans. When you can make that kind of connection, you're bound to have all kinds of residual effects. Sure, people will buy your music and go to your concerts, but you'll end up having an impact on the psyche of a significant number of people. They carry these attitudes with them forward throughout their lives, and when that happens, there are all kinds of unintended consequences. And number four, the lasting influence of The Cure's music. Current bands ranging from Korn to Marilyn Manson to Nine Inch Nails to Interpol to the Smashing Pumpkins and a whack of others all owe a major debt to The Cure's sound and attitude and even their look. Because of all of the above, it is not an exaggeration to say that The Cure was, and to a certain extent remains, one of the most influential and thus most important bands in the history of new rock. If you're of a certain age or mindset, you know this. This is preaching to the choir. But if you're wondering what all the fuss is about, I hope this explains things. If that sounds like you, that you want to get into The Cure a little bit more, and now you're intrigued, check into a couple of Cure Greatest Hits collections, starting with a CD called Staring at the Sea. Another good collection is entitled, appropriately enough, Greatest Hits. Both will give you an excellent overview of what this band has contributed to the canon of new rock. And once you do that, you should have a pretty good idea of why we should respect elders like The Cure. Technical production for all this is by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to The Ongoing History of New Music, a Deep Sky production.